Susan, you're going to have to come in because I got to find the bio. Sorry.
We are live, Facebookers. Welcome to the What's Your Journey show. Spunky Susan, Maverick Mary, and our beautiful, lovely guest, Rebecca Emery Chadwick. And here in just a moment, Maverick Mary is going to give us a really beautiful introduction of this lovely lady. So if you've never been to the show, we do live Q&A towards the end, and I will post a link that allows you to join us in this conversation if you have questions. If you don't want to do that, that's completely okay too. You could always just write it in the comments. We can see that. Please show us some love. Push the heart button. The more hearts you push, our show gets further out there. We reach more people with our wonderful messages for the world to hear. And if you've missed an episode, you can certainly check it out on A New Day with Susan podcast show. Or if you want to watch our beautiful faces, you could always go over to the YouTube channel as well. So take it on over, Mary. Are you ready?
Thank you very much, Spunky Susan, and everybody. Welcome to the show. I think it's Wednesday, April 10th, and this is show number 14.
Woo!
Show number 14. So lucky 14 tonight. And our guest speaker tonight is Rebecca Chadwick from no other than Capabilities for Life. Rebecca has attained her bachelor's degree in special education and elementary ed from the University of Maine in Farmington and a master's degree in special ed from Temple University. Rebecca is a certified reading specialist, a Dibel's mentor, CLM coach, and special education supervisor. She began working with children with special needs in 1991 and began her career in early intervention birth to 3. Rebecca's first public school classroom was a junior high, multiple disabilities classroom. She works in life skills support, autistic support, and multiple disability classrooms with students in preschool, early intervention through age 21. Rebecca's worked as an education consultant for 14 years, helping teachers of students in the most profound needs in academic and functional skills. Instruction, progress monitoring, data collection, and decision-making, and IEP goal development are key skills that Rebecca works with teachers to develop better outcomes for students. Rebecca instructs teachers and classroom staff in professional development settings and in the classroom, coaching and modeling to build skills in all staff members' districts to identify curricular needs of all students. Direct instructional materials, explicit instructional techniques, a continuum of skills for students with disabilities, and other instructional materials are used to meet the unique needs of all students. Building staff capacity to address the unique needs of all students is Rebecca's number one priority with every consultation. Let me read that again. Building staff capacity to address the unique needs of all students is Rebecca's number one priority with every consultation. Rebecca believes that there should be high expectations of all children and that every child should be held accountable and be able to interact in the classroom and with teachers every day. Rebecca's goal is to establish that mindset in every member of the school community. She's the proud mother of 5 children, ages 13 through 24, and the grandmother of one adorable 6-year-old daughter. All of her children are in her home or have gone through the special education system. So she's been on both sides of the public school fence. So here, let's give a big round and welcome for someone that's worked with struggling students both at home and in school. And tonight, Rebecca would really like to discuss the understanding, help our audience to understand the disabilities that cause students to struggle. So Rebecca, how about you take it away? I've talked enough. Let's hear from you.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you very much for inviting me to be on tonight. I'm really excited about talking about this topic. I'm really passionate about kids and doing what's best for kids, and helping teachers to be the best teachers they can be when working with kids. And I really wanted us to really have a discussion tonight about disabilities, and not just what disabilities are, because I feel like people pretty much have a good idea of what a disability is. If they've got kids in their classrooms who have disabilities, they're probably aware of that disability type on some level. But what I find a lot when I consult with people is they don't, they might know what a learning disability is, but they don't know how a learning disability actually impacts an individual child in their learning in the classroom. So somebody might say, oh, he has trouble reading. Okay, well, how does that manifest itself? What does that look like in your classroom? And then once you can identify that sort of thing, you can look at, well, now I know how it manifests itself. So then I can start to look at, okay, what do I need to do in order to reach this child? What do I need to change? What do I need to look at? And how do I look at that child's behavior? Because I see a lot of times where people will talk about kids in these situations and, well, he has a learning disability, but boy, is he lazy. Well, no, most kids aren't lazy. Most kids have periods of laziness, just like all of us. But if they're showing an overall laziness, as people say, across the board, there's something else going on that we have to look real closely at what the nuances are of how that disability is manifesting itself. The one I thought might be most familiar to your listeners is executive function disorders, because that's the big hot thing right now. You hear a lot about kids with executive function disorders. And when people think about executive function disorders, they think, oh, well, they're disorganized. Well, when you say you've got an executive function disorder, there are actually 8 different areas of the way you think that are impacted. It's, yes, organization is one of them, but then you also have impulse control. You have kids who can't make a shift they can't go from one thing to the next thing without having some preparation. You'll see this quite often in kids with autism, where they can't jump from one thing to the next. They need preparation. They need to follow routine and the schedule. But kids with executive function disorders can also have difficulty making that shift. And that's something that a lot of people just don't necessarily know. Emotional control is a real biggie. When you see kids with executive function disorders, they can have a lot of difficulty with managing their emotions. They can be extreme. So then you compound that. If we're talking about junior high and high school kids, you compound that with all the hormones, and you get some real extreme drama going there. But they do. So you look at these kids who have these difficulties, and the emotional control shows up. The ability to just start something. And this is where I think a lot of kids get tagged as being unmotivated. There are a lot of kids with executive function disorders that just can't get started on something because they don't know how. I like to say that people with executive function disorders, all they see is all the trees. They can't see individual trees in a forest. They just see the entire forest. And so they have trouble with initiation. So if I have trouble with initiation, I'm probably not going to be great about getting my homework done. I'm probably going to have trouble getting things started on independent time in classrooms. So to say nothing about working memory, kids who have working memory issues can only hold so much in their brain for so long. So you give a class 4-step directions, and a child with a working memory problem might remember number 1 and might remember number 4, but the ones in the middle are gone. And so you have the organization and planning of long-term projects. You have self-monitoring. They think frequently you'll see these kiddos will say they've done so well on something, and they've done something really great, and you take a look at it and you're like, no, this is awful. But they don't have a good sense of self-monitoring. So my point with this is that just looking at executive functions alone, and that's only one area of disability that is showing up over and over and over again in our classrooms, has all these different nuances to it that can manifest itself in ways that teachers think kids are being lazy, they're disruptive, they start to show behavior problems. And if they understood more of the underlying components of what that disability was, you'd be able to handle those things much better as a teacher. You'd be able to say, oh, okay, he has trouble with his working memory. I know from experience in my classroom, he's not going to remember 4-step directions. So I got to write it down for him, or I've got to give him to him one at a time. And if I take the time to do that, that's going to save me a meltdown in a kid or frustration in me. So, that's really what the message that I'm really passionate about getting out to people. And it helps teachers and it helps kids, because our goal is for kids to learn. If we're not aware of some of these things, then, kids aren't going to learn. It's going to be a frustrating circumstance for everybody. So I'm really thankful that you guys are having me on to talk about this, because it's something that I think we really need to do better at as professionals, is getting this information and learning about the nuances of disabilities.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that fantastic introduction. I was going to ask you about a couple of examples that I see, and what would be your response. Let's say that you're training a new first-year teacher. And during PD, we start to talk about different nuances that we see in the classroom. And one of those is we have students that come in, and when they find that their seat is not the same seat that they normally sit in, it causes them to get upset. Also, if someone else in the classroom touches their things, they get upset. Where maybe with other students, if they sat in a different seat, they'd be fine. Or if someone said, oh, is this your pencil? It's new? Oh, wow, this pencil's nice. To a student on the autistic spectrum, or students with disabilities cognitively, they're going to struggle with those two things. So what advice would you give to a first-year teacher for those two examples? If they're just common things off the top of my head that I came up with. But
before we answer that, Rebecca, so I just want to let you ladies know we do have a guest, Elizabeth, in the lobby section waiting to join us.
Great.
Elizabeth, before I bring you on, which will be here shortly, if just so you know, when I bring you on, that means you're actually live with us to have a brief conversation or to share your thoughts or ask questions. So we're excited to find out what you've got to share with us. If you don't want to go live, you can certainly ask us questions in the comments. And so Rebecca and Mary, I may interrupt you if a comment pops up, and it'll pop up actually on the screen if somebody does ask a question. So and then I'll just kind of nicely interrupt you to let you know, hey, somebody has a question. But it looks like Elizabeth does want to come on because she hasn't left the lobby section. So
great.
So whenever you guys want to bring her on, just let me know.
Okay, great.
Go ahead and bring Elizabeth on. In the meantime, Rebecca, could you answer that question? What are we going to
Sure. Yep.
give the first year? Because it'll take a minute for Elizabeth to just gain her bearings of seeing herself on the screen.
Okay,
Yeah.
she actually just left the lobby. Okay, go ahead and answer the question.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. The first thing that I tell any first year teacher that I work with, and I work with a lot of first year teachers, is the most important thing is to get to know your individual students. That you can know that you're going to have a student in your room with autism or a student with an intellectual disability. And you can know that commonly kids with autism have difficulty with changes and that they have social issues. And so to be aware of that is really, really important. The next piece that I would add to that is when you're thinking about changes that happen in your classroom, you have to think about how is it going to impact those kids who have difficulty with transition? How is it going to impact those kids? So there are some teachers who like to change, give assigned seats, but like to change weekly. Well, that might not be the best thing to do for a kid with autism or with any sort of disability that has difficulty with transition. So I would have a conversation with the teacher about that and say, well, in your preparation, go in knowing that kids like this have difficulty with the shift. So once you get to know them and you say, oh, okay, they're okay if I make changes as long as I tell them the day before, then you're fine. Or you find out, oh boy, I need to give this kiddo a week's notice and I need to talk about it every day. And we need to make sure that, he or she's comfortable with this before we make the change in seat placements. It's knowing the individual child, knowing the general parameters of what a disability is, because there are common features across kids with disabilities, but it's knowing the individual person that's more important. It's also understanding and pretty much setting up classroom rules that are good for everybody. It's just common courtesy. Most of us don't go around picking other people's stuff up without asking permission. We don't go around and take things without, say, oh, can I look at that? Or, wow, that's neat. May I see it? So setting some kind of classroom expectations about how you're going to respect one another and treat one another really helps to alleviate that problem. Because that is that can be, depending on what grade level you're working with, that can be a real biggie. I've had kids that I've worked with in the past who really, if you touched their stuff, it just rocked their world. Like they had things exactly the way they needed them for whatever they were doing, and somebody knocked their desk, and so they got mixed up, and it really does rock their world, because part of it is I have control over this. And part of this is, if this is the way I need it to be, then I don't need to focus on this. I can focus on something else. And so what do we do to help them? First of all, the whole class have some common set of rules for each other, how we treat one another. And then if something does happen, like somebody accidentally bumps a desk or somebody, something on accident happens, how do we help one another navigate through that? And again, that comes with knowing the student. So there are lots of strategies we can put in place once we know what the particular student needs. And that's really the key right there, is knowing and not presuming. That's another really big piece of this, is sometimes we see things happen in classrooms and somebody is yelling at somebody else, or somebody starts to cry, or somebody starts, and I've seen a lot of extreme cases, somebody starts throwing things or flipping desks or something like that. And what we see is the manifestation of that behavior. And so we start, whoa, wait a minute. You're being naughty. You're being disrespectful. You're being whatever those things are, without looking at what happened before that. What caused that event to happen? Because if we don't look at what caused that, then all we're seeing is a behavior, and we're reacting to a behavior. which clearly needs to be responded to. But we also need to look at, well, what's causing this behavior? Because I'm telling you right now that the majority of children want teachers and parents and administrators and everybody in their world. They don't want people to be unhappy. And so if this is starting to go on, we've got to look at it as more than, oh, he's just a bad kid, or he's just, in the younger grades, you'll hear him say, oh, he's so naughty.
Yeah.
So that's really important. I think.
Great. Elizabeth is back. Elizabeth, we cannot see your face in the frame. And that's okay too, but we could probably hear your voice. Can you say hello to us so we can hear you?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Hi. So if you don't want to show your face, that's okay. Just give us a little wave in the camera so we know you're a real person.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. Did you have a question?
Hey, welcome.
No, I'm just watching and learning right now.
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. So Rebecca, let's go back to what's going on in the classroom. And so can you talk about some of the things you might give to a first year teacher too, in terms of structure? What are they going to use in terms of scaffolding for that student? Are you expecting the teacher to, like a first year teacher is getting all nervous, like, oh, do I have to make up all of these differentiated pieces? Is there something I have to follow? They're always wondering what it is specifically that I'm supposed to do. They go to school, they have all the training, but now they're in the real classroom. Where is the best resource for them to go to say they know they're going to have students are going to need scaffolding? Where are they going to go to first to help with that structure in the classroom in terms of getting a worksheet together to scaffold someone's learning, that kind of thing in the regular classroom?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for people to realize is their special ed teachers are their best resource. That if I'm a general ed teacher and I know that I have a kiddo coming into my room that has an IEP, or sometimes what happens, and this is really horrible if this happens, but sometimes teachers don't even know they have kids with IEPs coming into their classrooms. So first thing that I always say to people is, you need to make sure that you're aware of the children in your classroom have 504 plans who have IEPs. And then you need to go to your special ed teacher, because your special ed teacher is your best resource. Now, depending on the size of your school, there might be one special ed teacher in a building, or there might be 20 special ed people in the building. So what you need to do is start with any special ed teacher in your building and go to them and say, hey, I've got this kiddo. Which case manager do I need to talk to see their IEP? Because you, as a general ed teacher, are required by law to follow what's in that IEP. And if you have not read the IEP, you certainly can't be following it. If you have not looked at the goals, if you don't know what the specially designed instruction is, there's no way that you can possibly be doing anything that student needs in your classroom with any certainty. So first thing is seek out your special ed teachers, find out who the case managers are, and then if you have to, if they don't offer and say, here's their IEP, you ask, may I see their IEP? Now, special ed teachers are a little bit of we are extremely, extremely cautious about violating children's FERPA rights. Children have FERPA is the HIPAA in public school. So we cannot share any information about a child with anybody who isn't directly related with that child in some manner. Mm-hmm. So sometimes real young special ed teachers will think that they can't share that IEP with general ed teachers, which
Mhm.
is completely incorrect, because the general ed teacher is teaching that child. They're allowed to know that information. Now, what we've got to avoid is, talking about that in the faculty room, or so-and-so
Right.
had this, that's a violation of FERPA. But if you're teaching that child, you need to know what's in that IEP. What it's also important for that first year teacher to know is any sound instructional practice that you're using is going to be good for everybody. So it's not necessarily that you have to do some special instructional practice for this child. It's you need to be using sound instructional practices with everybody. When you're doing that, you're gonna help everybody in your classroom, not just a child with special needs. If you have a child that's in your classroom that may not be on the same level as the other students in your room, that's where you got to go back to your special ed teacher and find out what's the purpose of this child being in my classroom. Not to question whether or not they belong there, but to find out why, when he's in my English class, what are the key things that the IEP team is looking for this child to learn. And if it's a new teacher, he or she has not been part of that child's IEP team previously. So they don't know what people were thinking when they
Very
put together
good information.
Exactly. So we have to ask, what goals, and when I say goals, I don't necessarily mean IEP goals. I mean, what are the team's goals for that child to be in this English class or in this science class? What do we want, is he supposed to meet all the standards, or are we looking at alternate standards? Some states have alternate standards, some states call them different things. But they're not the exact same standards as your general ed population would have to meet. If you're intellectually disabled, most states have alternate standards that you have that you would be working towards. So that first year teacher, what they really need to do is they need to look and make sure their instructional practices is in line with what's good instructional practice. I would talk to them about the routine of the classroom. Routines are good for everybody. If you have a structure in your classroom and it's something that kids can know that this is the way things go, that structure and routine is going to help everybody in the classroom. It doesn't mean that you don't change it up. It doesn't mean that you don't, but kids know what to expect when they come in. When I come in, I need to have my notebook out and I need to have my pencil out. I need to make sure that I have my science notebook and my science book open. I need to look on the board before, as soon as I sit down, to know what I need to have on my desk. Those sorts of routines, they help everybody. And they also improve your classroom management. So you're less likely to have other kids misbehaving or any kid misbehaving when you have those structures in place. So I spend a lot of time talking to first year teachers about, classroom management and putting those structures into place and setting your classroom rules. What's the expectation in your classroom for how people are going to treat each other and what rules are going to be followed? Everybody is different in the way they teach and the way they handle things. So in some classrooms, it may be people don't raise their hands, they just call out and they have discussion and so people, but in other classrooms, it's you better raise your hand and wait to be called on. So we spend a lot of time talking about how do you see that working in your classroom. And then if anybody in your room is having trouble with it, then really the teacher needs to make the change. The teacher needs to decide, okay, Johnny's having trouble with this. I have to do what's best for Johnny. Because it's not about me, the teacher, it's about Johnny. So what
I
do
feel
I have
like,
to do?
thank you so much, Rebecca. Susan, did you have a question for us? No? Okay. All right. I'm just going to check on our audience members here. Elizabeth, did you have a question you wanted to type into the chat box? So this time we'll open it up to our audience. For people that want to ask questions, you can either type your question into the chat box or you can ask your question live. Elizabeth, did you want to ask a question?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
In full disclosure, Elizabeth is my best friend.
Oh, great. Elizabeth, you can come on live. It's okay. Don't be shy.
Honestly, I just came in from hiking and I'm a mess, so that's why I'm doing it this way.
Oh, okay. Well, you can just, like I said, just wave in the screen and we know that you're there. Maybe show us a hiking boot. Or... so we lost Susan for a little while. And so do you work together or are you mutual friends? Or do you work together as well?
We met each other through work.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
We
work
worked
friends are
together
the
for a
best,
long
right?
time. Yeah. Yep,
You
that's
work
right.
so closely together. So it makes everything more joyful when you have good work buddies to work with.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So I usually ask every guest this type of question. So I'm just going to throw this out there. What is the single most beneficial structure that you have put in place during your years of teaching that is consistently effective and that you would like to pass on to our audience today?
Well, that's a really hard question, actually, because I think when you're thinking about structure, you have to think about what are your expectations? How do you want the children in your classroom to be able to interact with each other and interact with you? And the way that you do that can be really different based on the makeup of the classroom. Even within the same day, if you're switching classrooms, the makeup of the way you structure things is going to be different based on the makeup of the personalities and the instructional levels and that sort of thing in your classroom. So I think the key components to any structure in any classroom is recognizing first and foremost that if children aren't learning, then we as the teachers need to change what we're doing. That when we're looking at what's happening on a day-to-day basis, that our structure needs to include regular self-evaluation as far as, okay, did my children learn what I wanted them to learn today?
Right.
How do I know that? And what am I going to do about that tomorrow? So if they didn't master it today, or they didn't learn what I wanted them to learn today, then I need to then evaluate, okay, what went wrong? Is it because we had a fire drill in the middle of the lesson? Or is it because I need to find a different way to approach this because they weren't getting what I was trying to say? We've all had lessons like that. Anybody who tells you that they have not had a lesson that's bombed has never taught more than a day.
Right, exactly. I think that reflective teaching, that taking that time to write down what works and what doesn't work, and just keeping a small journal on your desk.
Yep, absolutely.
I know for me that's been important because it helps me to evaluate what works and what doesn't work. I do the same thing with my data and kind of jot little notes down about students and what works and what doesn't work. For the most part, a lot of that's in my my brain file cabinet, but depending on the size of the group that you're working with, each child might have different personalities that have to be addressed. So speaking of that, I wanted to ask you one other question. What do you think about the late, or I should say Latin, diagnosis of students coming into special education? Do you think it's more related to the fact that no one wants to label their child? Who would ever, you don't want to do that, but it's necessary to get the services that's required. A lot of parents, I think, don't want to sign the paper or have that meeting or have that discussion they just kind of tend to go through sometimes a denial phase. What can we say to parents to comfort them that this is a process that's to be helpful rather than to be afraid of, so that their students get the help that they need sooner, and help them to not be so nervous that it's such a labeling thing, because it's not like that anymore. So much has changed.
Yeah.
And, I want families to feel like they can come forward and get the help that they need, and so that we can move forward and we can correct what's there, and that we have more time to devote our instruction towards that particular issue that wasn't being addressed before. And that, glossing it over is not the way to go.
Yeah.
How can we make them feel better about the process?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all is recognizing that whenever, as parents, every parent believes that their child is as perfect as they can be, and recognizing that that there might be something wrong is really hard on parents. And I think it's important for teachers to recognize how difficult that is for parents. I think it's important to understand that being told that your child has a disability is probably, and I'm speaking as a mother, and I was a special ed teacher, probably the hardest thing that I have ever heard about any of my children. And being told that, that there's something that they're struggling with, something that they're not learning the way they should be learning. First of all, my sister will say, the mama bear comes out, and all you have this intense desire as a parent to protect your child. Whether you're a mother or father, you want to protect your child. And so that's one reaction that people can have. And teachers recognizing that reaction is a normal reaction and an okay reaction is something that especially young teachers who maybe have young children or don't have children yet, or people I've found that sometimes people whose children are grown and gone kind of forget what it was like to have, younger children, or never experienced going through being told your child couldn't do something or is struggling with doing something. So reminding yourself that this is a really hard thing for parents to hear. Some parents get angry, and while it's never okay for us to take abuse from anybody, we have to understand where anger comes from. And the anger really comes out of fear. I think a lot of times it's fear and it's frustration. So you can have parents who, are angry. You can have parents who are sad. You can have parents who are in denial. Like, no, you're wrong. No, you are wrong. No. Does that all the time at home. And you're like, And confronting a parent in that sort of situation is not the way to get them on board. It's just not the way to get them on board. So just like the kids, you have to meet them where they are. And you also have to make sure that you explain things. My gosh, my granddaughter was just diagnosed. She has ADHD, and she's struggling with learning how to read. And so her father my son asked me to go with him to the IEP meeting. And we walked in, and, there are 8 people sitting around the table. And if my son hadn't asked me, it would have been just him alone.
Wow,
and
that's intimidating and difficult.
It's really intimidating. It's very intimidating. And had he gone in with me and I didn't know anything about special ed, it would have been very intimidating. So, recognize that parents are walking into an environment that is very intimidating. So whatever you can do to make parents feel more welcome, make them feel as though they really are part of the team, and part of that is not using jargon. So don't start throwing around acronyms. Parents don't know what those acronyms are.
No.
Don't throw them around. Explain everything. Explain everything.
Including the things that your child is doing well.
Exactly.
The meeting
have
cannot be focused on all of the shortcomings, and they're not shortcomings. They're works in progress. I like to think of them that way.
Exactly. And I actually, this is quite a long time ago. One of my sons has, my youngest son has dyslexia. And he, in second grade, we went in, my husband and I walked into a meeting, and there were no less than 12 people sitting around the table. I was working, considered to be an expert in my field. And the special ed director of that district called me for information in order to do what to do about kids like my Ryan. And so we sat down in that meeting, and one of the professionals in the meeting proceeded to look at my husband and I and say, well, he's not reading because you guys didn't read enough to him. And I had to pause for a minute. What?
Excuse
First
me?
of all, I'm a reading specialist. This child has been read to.
Seriously, someone said that to you in a meeting?
Somebody said that to me in a meeting.
Wow.
That he wasn't reading because my husband and I did not read enough to him. That it was our fault that he wasn't.
Wow. That's probably...
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Probably about the worst thing that you could say to any parent.
Geez, if you want to get the mama bear out, those are fighting words.
Yeah.
No, you didn't. First, you should never say you didn't anything to a parent.
Yeah.
Never,
Just to anybody. Just to anybody.
This is
Exactly.
where Mama Bear Susan's going to come out. Susan, I feel like I knew it was coming. Sometimes she's quiet, but then something just ding, the bell goes off, and then she's ready. Go for it.
I mean, it's first off, I mean, I'm not a teacher outside of, like I don't teach in a school setting. However, I'm a teacher of mindset, spiritual healing, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And you're correct. Like it's your approach in the conversation with the parent, because that's the approach I didn't get. It was kind of like what you got, Rebecca. And even sometimes, so it's the context that we're coming from as people, as human beings. It's just how our brains function. Mm-hmm. And so even if you were to say, or your child is dealing with dyslexia, or, for two of my boys, I was told that they have a comprehension thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you are correct. It is like kind of mind-blowing, like, oh my gosh. And the first place I went to was I screwed my kids up. I'd done something wrong to them. I'm not doing enough. I felt, even though they may have not have been attacking me, I felt attacked because at that point in time, I didn't know nothing about mindset. But I wanted to just point out, like you did, I don't know if you guys knew this, like Richard Bronson from Virgin Records, he's a multi-billionaire. He was diagnosed with dyslexia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it made high school especially difficult for him. Mm-hmm. Peter Knight, he started his own company because of his ADD. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The CEO of Kinko's, he embraced his dyslexia and ADD when he started his company. Yep. So I think for me, like, it's the label, and I totally agree. Like, it's the approach in the conversation. Yep. As a parent, what I would say to other parents is to educate yourself. We are the voice for our children. We know we live with them 24/7.
Yes.
And we are their voice. And we don't have to come back attacking. Just come back with education. Participate as much as you can. There's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything wrong. You're doing the damn best that you know how, and the teachers are
Yeah.
doing the best that they know how. And
Right.
so with their so I think it's really important. It's the labels. I think it's the context, the meaning that we bring to dyslexia, the meaning that we bring to the words learning disability.
Right.
My boys, I don't care if somebody can tell me all day long they have a learning disability. To me, these guys are freaking awesome. They are so smart in their way. And one's a rapper and one's a beatboxer, and he's loving and just fully self-expressed, and he contributes. They all contribute to the world in their way. They are their own individual self. And so I would say to parents, don't take it personal. Take a deep breath when you sit down at that table.
Yeah.
And come from
You
a
have
place
to.
of love.
Well, and I think that I've often gone back and forth about whether or not I should work for the school districts or should I work as an advocate for parents, because there are things that I have sat at the table, not only as a parent but as a professional, heard people saying that I like my jaw drops, because I'm just, I cannot even begin to believe that you actually said that. And even in one-to-one conversations when I'm coaching with somebody, some of the mindsets that people come with are very fixed, and it makes it really hard. And when you look at it as from a coach's point of view, and you're working with professionals who have fixed mindsets, you have to take it really, really slow. It's just like working with the parent at the IEP table or calling a parent and saying that something happened. You have to take that person from where they are. Whether you're talking about a student or you're talking about a parent or you're talking about a teacher, you have to take them from exactly where they are and meet them there. You can't make them be any further down the path than they are. And so we have to realize when we come and sit down with somebody that I am bringing my knowledge to share with you, but I'm your equal. And you have things to share with me, I have things to share with you, and together we're going to learn and we're going to improve what we're doing for kids. Or even working, I'm a big proponent of having conversations with kids about, look, this is what's going on. Let me give you a quick example. I was in a school a couple weeks ago, and I was doing a reading placement test with a group of kids they were in emotional support, an emotional support classroom at the high school level. So they're all kids who are identified who have some sort of emotional disability. And so the teacher, there are two teachers and another consultant that working in that classroom as well with me. And all three of them said, you're not going to get these guys they're not going to do this placement test for you. They're not. They're just not going to do it. And I said, okay, well, let's just give it a try and see what happens. So, is it okay? Let me do the introduction. Let me talk to them about it. So what I did with every single one of them is the teacher would identify, okay, you can try this one first and see how it goes with so-and-so. Walk up to the child. May I sit down next to you? Not child, they're young adults. May I sit down next to you? Hi, I'm Becky. When I'm working with high school students in particular, I always go on a first name basis, especially when I'm going to ask them to do something that is going to be really difficult for them, and I'm not their teacher. I'm just some person showing up in their classroom. I'm Becky. I'm here to do this reading placement test with you. I would like the chance to explain it to you and show it to you and let you look at it and then you can decide if you're going to do this with me. And you can decide if this is okay with you. Will you come with me to look at it? Because we needed to go. Kids who can't read in high school don't want anybody else to hear them read. You don't ask kids who are having difficulty with reading to read in front of other kids. You just don't do it. So every single one of those kids went with me, and every single one of them read with me. Every one of them. Because
Aw.
I think it's because I recognized, first of all, this was something that was going to be hard for them. And I recognized in this particular situation, I can give them the power to say yes or no. And when they had the power to say yes and no, they all said yes.
Right.
But that's part of like recognizing each other as human beings.
Right. You really validated what they were feeling, but couldn't say
Yeah.
out loud. And that's
Exactly.
really, really important, I think, for any situation. I don't mean to cut anyone off or anyone's thinking, but Tammy's with us. Tammy, did you have a question for us tonight?
Tammy is one of our fellowing fans.
Ah,
Did you have a question for us tonight, Tammy? You can type it in the chat box. Usually you're one of our great question askers, so feel free to type it in the chat box, or if you want to come on live now and ask your question, feel free to do so.
while we're waiting for Tammy, there was just one other thing that I thought was really, really important that I got out there tonight. Is one of the things that people have to keep in mind with many, many children with disabilities is they are consistently inconsistent. And part of that leads to sometimes people thinking that they're choosing not to do work, or they're being lazy, or they're non-compliant. But kids, especially with ADHD, autism, Tourette's, many of the kids who have executive function disorders, they're consistently inconsistent. And part of that reason is because they might get it right on Monday, but have absolutely no idea what they did to get it right. So they can't.
Perfect point.
Yeah, they have no idea what they did to do it right. And so when you give them the same or similar activity on Thursday and they do it incorrectly, you did it on Monday, you should be able to do it today. No, you can't think that. You have to recognize that kiddos are with these types of disabilities can be consistently inconsistent. And that can be their only consistency. But the other piece of that is they don't learn from their mistakes, but they also don't learn from their correctness either. So we have to be really, really, really explicit about teaching them how to do something. A lot of times it's writing it down, it's giving them visuals, things that they can follow so that they can remember what they did to do it correctly. Because, they're consistently inconsistent, something that you really have to keep in mind.
Tammy, you might have to copy and paste it, unless you're on your cell phone. All right.
We're going to be wrapping up pretty soon because we're already at 9:22. So if you do have a question, feel free to post it now, because in about 3 minutes, we're going to wrap up. Susan, I'm going to put it back to you. Do you have